we can shift gears now and learn more about LEPC, Limited English Proficiency and Sensory Impairment. Try to say that fast 3 times. It's a challenge. And our presenter will be Cherie Rhines, who's been with the division 16 years. And she is currently the Training and Development Unit Supervisor of the Georgia Adult Protective Services and Public Guardianship Office. So that's a lot of training and development that's happening. And she's also wearing our division LEPC hat, which is crucially important. She's a board member and president-elect for the National Adult Protective Services Association. So once again, kudos to her on that. And she manages a few grants that we have, so she wears a lot of hats, LEPC just being one of them, and I will hand this off to her.
I was still muted. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. Trying to get everything set up where it needs to be so I can present to you guys. As Jennifer said, I wear a few hats, so many so that I prepared this presentation for a totally different reason. And then I looked back at the agenda and said, oh, they don't care about those hats. They want to know about LEPC. So thank goodness the predecessor who had this position before had developed a lot of great trainings around LEPC that I had to pull up and modify for our purposes today. So bear with me. This is really my first LEPC presentation since I took over this position. For that reason, please don't be too critical of me. So let's get started. So what is LEPC? LEPC, oh, and then I have a typo. Policies and procedures help us to make sure that people with limited English proficiency or sensory impairment receive excellent customer service. And so the LEP in LEPC is for limited English proficiency, and the SI is for sensory impairment, and that can be anything from difficulties with visual or hearing or speech issues. So we want to make sure that people receive quality services, and in fact, it is federal law that we make sure that people receive these quality services. You have the Title VI Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and the Americans with Disability Act of 1990. All of these come together, and they require that we provide quality services to everyone, regardless of any type of limitations they may have. And when we say quality services, that means that we can't provide them with less information or less access to services just based on the fact that they may have some limitations with their ability to speak English, or with other things like not being able to speak at all or having hearing impairments. So how to provide quality access. So when do we provide it? It's anytime someone has difficulty with English. It doesn't necessarily mean that they don't speak English. They may speak broken English. If you notice someone has a very heavy accent, they may struggle with some of their words, their English is broken, they may get by on a day-to-day basis in society, but when we are speaking about services and really important issues, we want to make sure that they understand every word that we're saying, and that we understand every word that they're saying. So if it's not that they don't speak English, but that they have broken English, we should still offer services at that time. And oh, I rushed this because there are so many typos. I apologize. I will send you guys a copy of this presentation and the typos will be removed. So who gets the service? anyone and everyone that we encounter. So it's not necessarily just our clients, but if they have caregivers that they want to be involved in their service, and we need to communicate with them as well, that we can provide interpreter services to them as well. If they decide that they do not want the service, there is a waiver that clients can sign if they prefer a non-professional interpreter, meaning a family member or a friend. We highly suggest that they take the professional services that are offered. But if they insist, there is a waiver that can be signed and they can have a non-professional interpreter work with them. What we're never going to do is we are not going to communicate through a minor. And when I am training new APS or PGO workers, one of the things I always say, if there's a minor there, the only thing you say to them is, let your mama know that I'll be back with an interpreter. That's the extent of the communication that we're going to do with a minor. So if we're unsure what the languages that they speak, we have a really handy tool that's called the I Speak sheet. And on that sheet, there are, and I can't tell you how many, but at least a couple of dozen different languages written out that says I, whatever the language is, and it would allow someone to point to the language that they speak where we can get them the appropriate interpreter services. So ensuring quality, there are 5 pointers to remember, and we're going to go over each one of those. So first, there is know the policies and the people. So know the language access coordinator in your office, and that's me. Provide access with no unreasonable delay. So as soon as you realize that someone has limited English or some type of sensory issue, you should immediately try to access those services for that individual. Review our DAS manual. We have policies and procedures both in our DAS as well as in the DHS manual, and those are the manuals and chapters where you can find more information on LEPC, and you'll find all of that on our Otis website. So if you have not looked at MAN 5600 and the LEPC policy or MAN 1701, please do so. I'll also let you know that there is a quick guide to LEPC, and I'm going to drop it in the chat after I finish speaking, along with a couple of other resources for you guys that will help you know how to access LEPC services when they're needed. So the second thing to remember is use signage and tools. So there are free interpreter services posters that we should have in every office and every desk for individuals to be able to see, and policies and notice of non-discrimination signs, as well as the I Speak card. So there are small versions of the cards that you can take with you if you are someone who goes out into the field and communicates with clients and the outside world. But then there are also large posters of these I Speak cards that can be posted up in your offices as well. So if somebody walks in, they'll be able to see it and point to their language. And then again, where to find this information at dhs.georgia.gov. You'll be able to find a lot of the forms and notices that can be printed out for your access. They're also, for those APS and PGO workers, we also keep a copy of the I Speak side of the manuals that are related to those. And you're usually given those at your new worker training, a copy of the I Speak cards. So the third thing to remember is providing high quality access. So using certified interpreters, and there'll be a list of the interpreters that we are currently using. Right now we use Ad Astra and Landbridge. But you'll have that list, and the list of numbers will be provided to you at the end. Again, we don't use minors, and we get sign waivers. Translators use qualified translators. An important thing to remember when we talk about translators is that if you have a coworker who happens to speak another language, they are not necessarily a qualified translator. In DAS, we have a handful, I believe, 4 individuals who have taken the translator test and have passed it and are able to work with clients who speak languages that they have passed the test for. However, they are not to act as interpreters or translators for other coworkers. So if you have a job in which you communicate with the public and you have passed the test as a translator, you are able to communicate on your own behalf with that person in that language. But you are not to be, pulled to someone else's desk or into an interview with another worker and act as their translator. That is not something that is allowed up under our LEPC policy. So again, those individuals who are qualified to act as translators themselves and not as others. So not really a translator, but they just are able to communicate with clients that we serve in DAS in the languages for which they've passed that translator test. I know that might be confusing, and you can ask me questions about that at the end. So the fourth thing is let the client decide. So just like in all the work that we do throughout DAS, we want to be, client-centered and client-directed. We want our clients who have limited English or sensory issues to tell us how they prefer to communicate. Not everyone who is deaf or hard of hearing uses sign language. Not everyone would want to use our interpreters that we have. And so therefore, while we strongly encourage them using our professional interpreters, it is not required because we want to put control in the hands of the individual who's in need of the service. And so how do we ask? So there are some temporary tools that we have that can help with translation or the interpreter may arrive. So you could use telephone access to language. We use LandBridge. I know people like to use the term the language line, but kind of like Q-tips, it is actually a brand. It's an actual company that owns the name Language Line. So we don't use the Language Line, but we use LandBridge. They are able to allow you to communicate telephonically with people in their language until you can maybe have a face-to-face interpreter. For those of us who go out in the field and have face-to-face meetings with people, you can use the LandBridge language access for telephonic interpretation until that point. There are also things like video relay services that can be used. What we want to be careful of is ad hoc interpreters. So again, the friends and family members who may want to act as interpreters, they often may omit things. Doing interpretation is very specific. Someone who is a certified professional interpreter, they have to relay every word that somebody is saying. Even if you misspeak, they need to relay what you misspoke and not just what they think you meant to say. And often with these ad hoc interpreters, they are interpreting what it is that you're saying. And what I mean by that, they're not translating, they're interpreting. They're taking what you're saying and they may be summarizing it. And we don't want that done. So be very careful of that. Also be careful of notes. So sometimes individuals who hard of hearing may want to pass notes back and forth. That's something that we sometimes do while we're waiting for a professional interpreter to arrive, that we may have some preliminary conversations with someone by passing notes. I think that may sometimes limit the questions we ask, and it may also limit the amount of detail we receive in the responses that we get from this individual, because it can be sometimes cumbersome of the note passing back and forth. Also, lip reading or speech reading, be careful of that as well. If someone tells you, yes, I'm hard of hearing, but I'm a really good lip reader, only about 30% of what you're saying is actually being understood. And that's for even some of the best lip readers out there. The ability to lip read is not going to give a verbatim um, translation or verbatim understanding of what it is you're saying. So we want to be very careful of all of those things. So again, we're letting the clients decide. Um, Accessible spoken language, face-to-face on-site interpreters for those of us who go out to clients' homes to meet with them. That's usually the best form of a translator, to have someone there with you. Remote telephone-based interpreters can also be very uh, non-spoken language. You can have face-to-face sign language interpreters. We can use the TDY systems, the CART services, and in the information that I'm going to put in um, the chat, you'll find more information on who to call for each of these different types of services or how to access them. And then also accessible written information. If you encounter someone who reads Braille, you can ask for specific documents that you use on an everyday basis to be translated into Braille. Or if you have a specific letter or information that is client specific that you need to get out to them, it can be translated into Braille. You would just reach out to me with that document, and then I will go through the process of having it translated. Recently, we had for APS workers, they always use the HIPAA form whenever they go out. And then they also use the release of information form with many of our clients. Both of those documents were recently translated into Braille for a specific client, but we printed additional ones, and copies have been sent out to all of the DAS field offices. So copies of the HIPAA and the release of information are available in Braille. But if there are other forms that need to be translated, we can do that as well. They're qualified readers. Anyone who can speak very clearly, enunciate, and articulate what is on a form can act as a qualified reader. There are internet tools and recordings that can also help with communication. The last thing that I really want you guys to remember is to document everything. Make a record of each LEPC service that you're provided. So what did the client choose? How did they want to communicate? Document that. Document what tools or services you may have provided to them. Was the client satisfied with the access that you provided? And were you satisfied with the access that was provided? So when we are dealing with the contractors that we work with to provide interpreter services, we want your feedback on, were they professional? Do you feel like they were, translating everything you said? Were they timely? Did you receive the access in a timely manner? Let us know those things, because I will kind of channel that and funnel that up the chain, so that when there are issues, they can be addressed directly with those providers that we contract with. So please let us know if you were satisfied, if the client was satisfied. And also, we also have something called a secret shopper out there that calls our Georgia Cares line, our AAA's, our APS line, so that they can get a feel of, are we providing adequate access to individuals with limited English or sensory impairment? So, and that feedback, comes back to DAS as a whole, to our leadership, and that will prompt additional training for our staff. So feedback goes both ways. So ready, set, go. So this is a very, very quick review of LEPC. And, how can you follow up? At me, my contact information is listed there. I am your LEPC coordinator, and I will try to answer about LEPC. I'll do my best.
Thank you, Cherie. Really appreciate that. I know it's a new area, but you did a great job. Any questions on LEPC? You can just unmute yourself and go ahead. Okay, I don't see any questions, Cherie, so you are perfect. I did attend a session yesterday, a presentation about disabilities and COVID, and they had a deafblind individual who had the need for a tactile interpreter. And that was the first time I'd seen a tactile interpreter, which means they do the sign language in the gentleman's hand so that he could feel the signs and then could sign back. And he had just recently, I believe he was born deaf, but had just recently lost his sight. So that was a new challenge for him. So he knew sign language, but now he had to do it in someone's hand. And he was talking about how a lot of people did not even know that that was a style of interpretation. And especially during COVID, the challenges of that, since people were afraid of touch during COVID. We still are probably. And his interpreter having to, touch his hand. So he had a lot of challenges and had to self-advocate a lot during COVID in order to get services. So that was just an interesting perspective that I hadn't, I've heard about, but hadn't seen on in a live presentation. So that was different. And yes, if someone needs a tactile interpreter, then, we would pay for it like any other interpreter. We would all be learning and figuring that out. So that was just something new I learned this week.
Yeah, it's something I have seen it done before, but in this new position as, the LEPC coordinator, it is not something I ever even thought about. So I'm glad you brought that to my attention, but also to everybody on the call's attention. So if you encounter someone who is deaf and blind, to find out, had they ever, do they use sign language, and do they feel like it would be useful to them to have someone as a tactile interpreter, which the term is new for me. I've seen it done before, but I had never heard that term before. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, I didn't know. I don't know if that's the official term, but that's the one he used, so that's what I'm using. So.
Jennifer, while I know you guys wanted to know about One Hat, I would like to share my team with everybody else on the call so that if we're ever back in the office and you see them, you'll know who else is a part of the training and policy team, and as well as my turf team. So if you will indulge me for 1 minute.
I will, but also know that we also have AAA staff and DHS staff on board. So if they're DAS staff, they might see us in the office, but you might see us at conferences or something if you're eventually one day again soon.
So on the board, our policy and training team And this is also, if you have any questions about APS or PGO, or want any training in your AAA on these specific topics, Chanel Belasco is our APS specialist. CC Walker is our PGO specialist, and our most recent addition is Marquita Grant, who is a supervision specialist. She is creating curriculum and training for all of our APS and PGO supervisors. Then we also have our TURF unit, which is temporary emergency respite fund unit. They provide case management services to people who have been placed through our TURF program for emergency respite. Dante Thomas, who's the supervisor. We have Amanda McFarland, who's our newest addition as a case manager, and Alexis Alexandra. And then Roxanne De Niro is the administrative assistant for our TURF program. So I just wanted to quickly share them with you guys so that you know they're out there and that we are all here to serve. And if you have any questions about APS or PGO or TURF, you can contact me or any of these individuals directly.